The frontier. Let's talk about it for a minute. You've seen the Hollywood version, haven't you? The movies with the handsome, stoic pioneer, the smiling wife in a pristine apron, and the little log cabin nestled under a blanket of impossibly white, sparkling snow. The fire is always roaring, the stew is always bubbling, and everyone looks like they're enjoying the most serene, rustic evening of their lives. It's a nice thought, a nostalgic little fantasy. But let me tell you, that picture is a pleasant lie. It's a work of fiction designed to make you feel better about the unimaginable reality of a frontier winter. A reality that was less about romantic fortitude and more about a grim, exhausting, and often futile struggle to just make it to dawn. We're not talking about a brisk sweater weather evening where you might need to turn up the thermostat and put on some socks. We're talking about a cold that is a physical, living thing, a malevolent force that promises to turn you into a human ice cube if you don't take it seriously. It's a cold that doesn't just make you shiver, it makes your teeth ache. It turns the air you breathe into a sharp metallic sting that burns your lungs with every inhale, a feeling that never leaves you. We're talking about a kind of cold that feels less like a season and more like a permanent state of being, a slow, methodical attempt by the world to turn you into a permanent statue of misery. The world isn't just indifferent, it's actively trying to get rid of you. Every gust of wind is a threat. Every moan of a creaking log is a whisper of a collapse to come. You are an unwelcome guest, and the world wants you to know it. Your home, that sturdy little log cabin you spent all summer building with your bare hands and a rusty axe. Yeah, that thing is not a fortress. It's a sieve. It's a box of roughly hewn logs with gaps the size of your thumb, filled with a temporary paste of mud, moss, sticks, and whatever else you could jam in there. And let me tell you, that paste, that chinking as they called it, is not built to last. The moisture from the air, the constant pressure of the wind, it all works together to freeze that chinking, crack it, and send little bits of it raining down onto your floor, leaving behind a perfectly good wind tunnel for the outside world to whistle right through your living room. You're sitting there shivering, and you can feel the icy fingers of the outside world on your ankles, on your neck, a constant chilling reminder that you are not safe. Not really. The wind is an orchestra of misery, playing a mournful tune through the gaps in your walls, a sound that gets into your very soul. You can hear it as you try to sleep, a low hum that promises nothing but more cold. But that's just the opening act, folks. The sun has vanished, swallowed whole by the horizon. The one tiny, oiled paper window in your cabin is now a black rectangle, a portal to an outside world that has officially become your sworn enemy. The cold is winning, the day is gone. Now the real battle begins. Beyond the basic structure, the ground itself was a constant enemy. A dirt floor, even when packed down hard, was a natural conductor of cold. The frigid earth leached every last bit of warmth from the cabin's lowest reaches. Imagine trying to keep warm when the very floor you walk on is frozen solid. Your feet are numb, not just from the cold seeping through the gaps in your boots, but from the unyielding chill of the earth beneath. A simple trip from the fire to the bed was a moment of pure physical discomfort. A quick run over a frozen landscape, a silent reminder of your precarious position in this hostile world. There were no rugs or carpets, maybe a few animal pelts if you were lucky, but for most the ground was a constant, freezing presence, a silent accomplice to the wind and the cracking chinking. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a form of constant low-level torture, a cold that worked its way up from your toes to your bones, a kind of chill that no amount of fire could ever truly erase. It was the feeling of being a small, insignificant life on a vast, frozen planet. The furniture itself was a part of the fight. The log beds, crudely built from the same trees as the cabin, were not soft or inviting. They were platforms of hard wood, stacked with a few quilts, maybe a straw-filled mattress if you had the materials. There was no comfortable furniture, no plush chairs by the fire. You sat on a wooden bench, a three-legged stool, or a log, and you learned to live with the hardness, with the ache in your back and the splinter in your palm, because that was the cost of making it through the night. The very tools of your comfort were built from the elements that were trying to kill you. The iron pot hanging over the fire, the single iron skillet, the few wooden bowls, these were not decorative items. They were the sum total of your life, the only things that stood between you and a very uncomfortable eternity. And every time you picked one up, a fleeting thought would pass through your mind. This is all I have. This is it. And then there was the silence. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the kind of silence that brings dread. The snow would fall, a thick, smothering blanket that muffled every sound. The wolf howls would disappear. The creaking of the trees would cease, and all you would be left with was the sound of your own breathing and the crackle of the fire. And in that silence, your mind would start to wander. You'd think about the last time you saw your neighbor, about the threat of a late-season blizzard, about the food supply that was dwindling faster than you had planned. The silence wasn't a rest, it was a mental battlefield, and it was just as dangerous as the cold. The grim rituals of nightfall. Your fire, your beautiful, life-giving fire, that's your number one priority for the night. You can't let it die, not for a minute. That ember is your last defense against the cold. So, before you even think about turning in, you've got a job to do, banking the fire. This wasn't some gentle act of tending to the flame. It was a surgical operation, a high-stakes ritual performed every single night. You'd carefully shovel the hottest coals to the back of the hearth, a glowing pile of concentrated life. Then, you'd cover them with a thick, insulating layer of ash, like you're putting them to bed. The goal is to smother the flames just enough that they can't burn away into nothingness, but not so much that they die completely. You're aiming for a slow, agonizing death that lasts all night, a silent, smoldering ember that will still be there in the morning. Then, you'd place a massive backlog, a huge, heavy log on top, to contain the heat and keep the banked coals safe. If you get it wrong, you wake up to a cold, dead hearth, and you're going to be fighting to make a new fire with fingers that feel like frozen sausages. It's a very high-stakes game of embers, folks. The pressure is on. Even with a perfectly banked fire, that cabin is not a sauna, it's a refrigerator. Heat rises, right? So the air at your feet, even if you're right next to the hearth, is going to be biting. Your family is huddled together, a little island of warmth in a sea of frigid air. So, what do? You don't sleep alone. Not ever. And I don't mean not ever in a romantic way. I mean it in a purely pragmatic, thermodynamic sense. The whole family piles into one bed. Mom, Dad, little Timmy, baby Susie, and even your surly teenage daughter who thinks she's too cool for family snuggles. She's getting in that bed too. This isn't a warm, fuzzy Hallmark movie moment. This is a survival strategy. You create a human heat pump, a single shared source of warmth against the frigid air. You've got little Timmy wedged between his parents, an arm here, a leg there, all in a desperate attempt to create a single shared body temperature. And let me tell you, this isn't a 5-star hotel. This is the frontier. You're sharing that bed with the full symphony of humanity. The snores, the coughs, the shuffling, the general funk of people who haven't had a proper bath since the last thaw. Personal space? That's a luxury that doesn't exist. You are a single, heaving, breathing mass of shared misery and survival. But it gets better. What about the animals? You didn't just let them freeze to death outside. Your livelihood, your very existence depended on them. The cows, the chickens, the pigs, they were a vital part of your household economy. If they died, you starved. So what did you do? You brought them inside. No, not into the living room, but into the same cabin with you. You'd have a cow lowing softly in the corner, a pig grunting contentedly by the door, and the chickens roosting on a shelf, clucking and scratching. The smell? Oh, the smell. It was a bouquet of damp earth, hay, unwashed animals, and a faint hint of wood smoke. It was the scent of a long, cold night. It was the smell of survival. You're trying to sleep, and you've got a cow breathing heavily a few feet away, a chicken squawking, and your little brother kicking you in the spine. It was a cacophony of life, a constant low-level reminder that you are a part of a much larger, messier ecosystem. And these weren't just animals, they were your life support. The cow provided fresh milk, a vital source of calories and nutrients when food was scarce. The chickens, while they might have slowed their laying in the winter, could still provide a rare egg. The pig was future meat, but for now it was a living radiator, a source of heat you couldn't afford to lose. The cabin wasn't just a home, it was a living, breathing barnyard, a microcosm of the survival food chain. You'd wake up in the morning to the smell of hay and animal dung, to the sound of a cow chewing its cud. This wasn't a quaint, rustic experience. It was a desperate, communal act of endurance. Every breath they took was a breath of air that you would one day be grateful for. Beyond the animals and the banked fire, there was the clothing. You didn't just wear it, you lived in it. Woolen trousers, thick flannel shirts, and whatever else you could layer on, and you didn't take them off at night. No, you slept in them, every last layer, to trap every bit of precious body heat. Your bed wasn't just a place to rest, it was a textile fortress. You'd crawl under layers of hand-sewn quilts and whatever animal pelts you could get your hands on. The weight of them was a comfort, a physical barrier between your frail human body and the unyielding cold. The quilts weren't just blankets, they were a patchwork of family history, a collection of every scrap of fabric you had, a physical representation of the years you had fought this cold together. Each stitch was a tiny victory. And then there were the hidden helpers, hot stones. You'd heat rocks in the fire, wrap them in a cloth, and place them at the foot of your bed. Or you might have a small iron kettle filled with hot water. These were the frontier's version of a modern-day heating pad, a small, concentrated burst of warmth that could stave off the worst of the cold. The feel of that warmth against your freezing feet was an indescribable luxury, a brief moment of comfort in a long night of misery. You'd hold that warmth, cherish it, and hope it would last long enough for you to drift off to sleep. It was a small, quiet act of defiance against the night, the dawn of a new battle. And let's not forget about the little things, like water. You needed water to drink, to cook, to survive. But outside, the water bucket is a solid block of ice. So every morning, the first person up had to break the ice, and I mean literally, on the water bucket. It was a loud, jarring sound, a wake-up call to the fact that even the most basic necessities were a struggle. You had to melt that ice on the fire, a slow, painstaking process that filled the cabin with a delicious, smoky aroma, a smell that meant you made it through the night. And what about the children? Small, vulnerable, and prone to illness. A fever in the middle of a blizzard was a silent, desperate battle. You had no medicine, no doctors, just a mother's intuition and a few home remedies made from herbs and hope. The parents would take turns, a hand on a forehead, a whispered prayer, a constant vigilance against a world that was trying its best to kill you. And speaking of the children, You think they're asleep? Half of them are probably awake, listening to the wind and the strange noises of the cabin, the creaks and groans that are just the logs expanding and contracting with the cold. Their imaginations would run wild. Is that a wolf outside? Is that the wind? Or a bear? They're too young to know the difference, and you're too tired to care. But as the night wears on, you get into a rhythm. The fire crackles, a little less brightly. The wind howls, a little less fiercely. Your mind starts to go into a kind of hibernation mode. You're not thinking about the future, about the crops, about the letters you'll never get. You're thinking about the present, about the warmth of the person next to you, about the slow, steady beat of your own heart. This isn't a battle of strength or wit. It's a battle of endurance. And finally, a new sound. A sound you've been waiting for all night. The roosters? Not a glorious cock-a-doodle-doo, but a weak, sleepy crow. It's still dark, but a tiny sliver of hope has appeared on the horizon. The worst of it is over. The dawn is coming. But the cold isn't gone, not by a long shot. The first person to get up has to break the ice on the water bucket. Yes, it's a solid block now, and get the fire roaring again. They are the unsung hero of the morning, a pioneer who braves the icy air to bring life back to the cabin. The smoke begins to rise from the chimney, a signal to the gods of the frontier that you made it. You survived another night. And that's how it was. Not a romantic pastoral scene, but a constant grueling struggle against an environment that was indifferent to your existence. A struggle of banked fires, shared body heat, and the quiet, desperate hope that the sun would rise again. It was a sleepless, cold, and often miserable affair, but they did it. They endured. They woke up every morning, and they faced it all again. And that, my friends, is the real story of the frontier. Not the paintings, not the myths, but the long, cold nights that made them who they were. This nightly routine was not just about survival. It was about defining a way of life. The challenges of the night forged a unique kind of human being. They were not soft or pampered. They were a people who understood in their bones the value of every single log, every single breath, and every single moment of shared warmth. They were defined by their endurance, by their grit, by their quiet defiance of a world that wanted them to fail. Their story isn't about grand gestures or monumental victories. It's about a series of small, hard-won battles. The battle to keep the fire going, the battle to get through the night, the battle to wake up in the morning and face it all again. And they did it. They just did it. And in that act of simple endurance, they created something far more valuable than any skyscraper or any monument. They created a legacy of resilience, a blueprint for surviving the unimaginable. We sit here today in our warm, comfortable homes, and we can't even begin to imagine what that was like. We can't feel the bite of that wind or the ache in those bones, but we can learn from it. We can learn that the most important battles are often fought in the dark, in the silence, when no one is watching. They are the battles of will, of perseverance, of a quiet, unyielding hope. So the next time you see a picture of a little log cabin in the snow, don't just see the beauty, see the struggle. See the family huddled together for warmth. See the single banked fire, the sole point of light in an ocean of darkness. And understand that what you are looking at is not a romantic scene from a bygone era. You are looking at a monument to human strength, a living, breathing testament to the power of a family to endure. And that, my friends, is a story worth telling. But the story doesn't end there. The morning brought a new set of brutal realities, a fresh slate of challenges laid out by the unforgiving cold. The first breath of the day was a sharp, painful gasp of freezing air, a rude awakening to the fact that the cold was still with you, inside the cabin and out. The banked fire, a smoldering victory from the night before, needed to be revived, a careful, painstaking process. You couldn't just toss a log on and expect it to catch. No, you had to tend to it, blowing on the embers until they glowed a fiery red, feeding them tiny twigs and shavings, until a new, fragile flame was born. It was a delicate, high-stakes ballet of warmth, and a mistake meant starting all over again, with frozen fingers and a sense of growing panic. And then there was the water. The bucket, which was a source of life the day before, was now a solid block of ice, a testament to the night's victory. The act of breaking it was a ritual of defiance, the loud crack of the axe against the frozen water, a declaration that you were still here, still fighting. You would chip away at the ice, gathering what you could, and place the chunks in the kettle to melt slowly over the newly revived fire. The hiss and steam of the melting ice was the sound of a new day beginning, a slow, methodical reclamation of your life from the grip of the cold. Every drop of water was a precious commodity, a resource that had to be earned. Outside the cabin, the world was a still, white wasteland. The sun was up, but it offered little warmth. The snow, piled high against the chinking, was both a blessing and a curse. It was a natural insulator, a kind of primitive foam, but it also made every task a monumental effort. Hauling water from the well, chopping firewood, feeding the animals. It was all done in a world of deep, unyielding snow. Every step was a struggle. Every chore was a battle. Your breath, a white cloud in the air, was a constant visual reminder of the effort it took just to exist. And the hunger was a different kind of cold. The salted meat, the dried vegetables, the meager stores of flour, they were enough to keep you alive, but not enough to feel full. Your body was a furnace that was constantly burning fuel just to stay warm, and the calorie deficit was a constant low-grade misery. You dream of the bounty of summer, of fresh vegetables and ripe fruit, but for now, you survived on a monotonous diet of hardtack and boiled rations. The very act of eating was a reminder of what you had and what you lacked, and the boredom, the endless mind-numbing boredom. There were no books, no radios, no television. The nights were long, and the days were short, and the world outside was a single monochrome landscape of white. You would mend clothes, repair tools, and tell the same stories over and over again. Your mind, an engine of worry and fear, had nothing to focus on but the endless cycle of survival. The children, confined to the small, smoky cabin, would get into fights, their energy bottled up with nowhere to go. You would sit by the fire, watching the flames dance, and you would wonder what the spring would bring, if you would even make it to the spring. The greatest fear wasn't the cold itself. It was the fear of the unexpected. An illness, a broken tool, a depleted woodpile, a predator circling too close to the cabin. These were the things that kept you up at night, the variables that could turn a grim struggle into a death sentence. There were no emergency services, no one to call for help. You were an island, and if you failed alone. The knowledge that a single simple mistake could cost you everything was a weight that you carried every moment of every day. And yet, in the midst of all this misery, there were moments of grace. The taste of a hot stew on a frigid night. The sight of a tiny bird, a flash of color against the white snow. A sign that life was still out there, fighting just as hard as you were. The sound of a child's laughter. The shared silence of a family sitting together by the fire. Each of you a small, fragile bastion of warmth against an unyielding world. These were the moments that made it all worthwhile, the tiny victories that kept you going. They were the moments that reminded you that you were more than just a survivor. You were a family, a small, stubborn band of humans who refused to be defeated. The frontier wasn't just a place, it was a crucible. It was a test of the human spirit, a challenge to see how much a person could endure. And those who survived, those who faced down the cold night after night, were changed forever. They were a different kind of human being, a person who understood, in their very bones, the true meaning of resilience. They were the sleepless historians of their own lives, the authors of a story that was written not in ink, but in sweat, in frost, and in the quiet, smoldering heat of a banked fire. And that story, my friends, is a masterpiece. Beyond the physical hardship, the cold also imposed a kind of psychological toll, a form of isolation that was as profound as the biting wind. The world shrunk down to the size of your cabin. The vast open spaces of the frontier, which had once represented endless opportunity, now felt like an impassable barrier, a frozen moat that separated you from everyone and everything. You were cut off. You were alone. Your only company was the fire, the animals, and the quiet, nervous breathing of your family. There were no visitors, no new faces, no fresh stories to share. The rhythm of your life was dictated by the rising and setting of a sun that seemed to offer more light than heat. The days blurred into weeks, and the weeks into a long, grinding season of white and gray. The monotony was a kind of slow-motion madness, a test of your will that was even more insidious than the physical cold. You had to find strength not just in your body, but in your mind, to convince yourself that this endless winter would in fact end. And the smells. Let's not forget the smells. The aroma of pine and smoke was always present, a comforting scent that was a constant reminder of the fire that was keeping you alive. But it was mixed with 100 other smells. The scent of damp wool and unwashed bodies, the faint, earthy aroma of the animals who shared your home, the acrid tang of wood smoke that stung your eyes and clung to your clothes, the smell of boiling vegetables and rancid fat. It was a bouquet of survival, a complex tapestry of scents that told the story of your life in that cabin. It wasn't pleasant, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a part of you. It was the smell of life, and you learned to love it. And the chores. Every single day, the chores were there, an endless repeating cycle of labor. Chopping firewood was a full-time job, a battle against the forest that provided both your shelter and your fuel. The axe was a weapon, and the logs were the enemy, and you had to win that fight every single day, or you would die. Then there was the task of maintaining the chinking, a constant battle against the wind and the cold. You would mix more mud, gather more moss, and push it into the gaps, a Sisyphean task that you knew you would have to repeat the next day, and the day after that. And the children, they had to be taught, cared for, and kept from going mad with boredom. The mother's job was never done, a constant cycle of cooking, cleaning, and mending, a silent, thankless battle against filth and despair. The father was out in the cold, a solitary figure fighting a one-man war against the elements. The family was a well-oiled machine of survival, and if a single part broke down, the whole thing would fall apart. And yet, there was a kind of beauty in it all. The sight of a fresh snowfall, a clean blanket of white that covered the grime and the misery, if only for a few hours. The glow of the firelight against your family's faces, a soft, intimate glow that made them look like angels. The quiet, gentle rhythm of the night when the wind would finally die down and the cabin would feel, for a brief moment, like a true sanctuary. These were the moments that made it all worthwhile. the tiny gifts from a world that was otherwise trying its best to kill you. They were the moments that you would hold on to, the memories that you would carry with you for the rest of your life. And when the first signs of spring finally arrived, it wasn't a sudden glorious burst of life. It was a slow, subtle shift, a barely perceptible change in the air. The snow would start to melt, a slow, grudging retreat from the sun's new power. The days would get a little longer, the nights a little less cold, and you would know in your bones that you had made it, you had survived, and that was all that mattered. The frontier wasn't a place for the weak. It was a place for the strong, for the stubborn, for the people who refused to give up, no matter how dire the circumstances. It was a place where a family's survival was a daily miracle, a testament to the power of human will. The cold nights, the banked fires, the shared body heat, the quiet, desperate hope, these were not just parts of a story. They were the story. They were the living, breathing testament to the quiet, unyielding strength of the human spirit. And that, my friends, is a story that will last forever. And so the long wait began. Not just a wait for spring, but a wait for the first glimpse of a traveler on the road, a sign that the world was still out there. You'd find yourself staring out the small, greasy window, a tiny pane of oiled paper that was more of a suggestion of a window than an actual one, just hoping for a wisp of smoke from a neighboring chimney, a sign that someone else was also enduring this long, silent battle. The isolation was a heavy cloak, and the loneliness was a sharp, biting cold that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. You lived in a world of ghosts, the ghosts of the people you had left behind, the ghosts of the life you had once known, and you carried them with you, a silent, unseen burden, a constant reminder of how far you had come and how alone you truly were. The children, in their small, confined world, would create their own reality. They would fashion dolls out of old rags, whittle toys from scraps of wood, and invent games that could be played in the small space in front of the hearth. Their imaginations, unburdened by the grim realities of the world, were a constant source of wonder. They would create their own stories, their own worlds, and for a few brief moments, you could almost forget the struggle. Their innocent laughter was a kind of warmth, a small, fragile flame in the darkness, and you would cherish it, hold on to it, and use it to keep your own despair at bay. And the knowledge, the quiet, unspoken knowledge that was passed down through the generations, the knowledge of how to read the wind, how to tell when a storm was coming, how to find the driest wood in the forest, how to make a poultice from foraged herbs. This wasn't a knowledge that was written in books. It was a knowledge that was etched into the very fabric of your family's history, a silent language of survival that you would one day pass on to your own children. It was a knowledge born from hardship, from trial and error, from 1,000 tiny victories and 100 crushing defeats. It was the knowledge that made you a true pioneer, a person who was not just living on the land, but was a part of it. And so the story of the frontier winter isn't just a story about cold. It's a story about the quiet, unyielding strength of the human spirit, about the power of family, and about the endless repeating cycle of a battle that was fought in the silence and the dark. It's a story that lives not in history books, but in the echoes of a creaking door, the faint smell of wood smoke, and the low, contented groan of a sleeping cow. It is the real story of the frontier, a story of quiet, brutal beauty,